thank you for being here. So again, I'm Jeff.Litfin. I'll be conducting the workshop tonight, and we'll get to know each other a little bit tonight, so I'm glad you're here. So CEP stands for Certified Estate Planner. So I am not the attorney. I'm close to one. I do a lot of work with our attorney partners. In fact, our team, Generations Legal Services, we work with 4 different law firms throughout the state of Minnesota, and they can draft documents and they do all the legal work. I do a lot of the other work. I do all the fun stuff. I do all the things the attorneys don't like to do or don't want to do. So I conduct all of our education workshops on behalf of our law firm partners. I do all the in-home meetings and answer basic questions, and I do a lot of the administration. So think of me as the paralegal. I always like to describe myself as the nurse, but the attorney is the doctor. And we're just working together, which means I do all the work and they get all the money. That's really what that means. So,
at least.
Anyway, so our team is located officially in Osseo, so just up the road on 169 in the small town of Osseo. But I travel all over the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin, teaching on topics like family cabins and estate planning and succession and how do we not leave a mess behind for our children. And that's our goal, to make sure things are set up to go smoothly and efficiently whenever that time comes. So tonight's a little bit about family cabins, and these are...
You know a little bit about Wisconsin.
A little bit. Our attorneys will draft documents. The question was, so we're going to talk a little bit, and I know a little bit about Wisconsin. And as you know, or if you are from Wisconsin, that is a community property state. Minnesota is a common law property state. And that sometimes comes into play on how assets are owned and how they transfer to others. So we'll talk a little bit about that. When it comes to cabins and of really having a plan in place, it really doesn't matter where you live. The point is we have to have some sort of plan that will make sure this wonderful asset that we love and have used and enjoy can now go to the next generation without any problems, without courts, without lawyers, without time or delay or frustration. That's our goal when we do these workshops. So I'm glad you're here tonight, and that's just a little bit about our team. So think of our team as a paralegal team, and but I got 4 different law firms behind me. They're the legal experts. I have people that understand the financial world and the tax world. So there's 3 different disciplines whenever we have a discussion about estate planning. You can't just walk home from the lawyer's office and think that you're done. You're not done. There's more that has to happen with that will or even that trust that the lawyer drafted, right? There's things that have to be conveyed or retitled. Beneficiary forms might have to be updated or adjusted. We might have to add transfer instructions to other assets. Well, the attorneys many times can't do all of that because that requires securities licenses, insurance certifications, banking regulation. They're lawyers. They're doing law things, and that's great. So we still need them, but just remember, estate planning encompasses what I call the Bermuda Triangle: legal, financial, and tax. And all of these areas affect you and affect the assets you're trying to give your loved ones. So that's our goal. We want to look through all 3 of those lenses before we answer a question or try to help someone. So that's how our team is structured. So we've got several different people with different certifications on the team. I'm sort of the point person. So I'm the one that gets to enjoy these workshops and get to meet you and that type of thing. So, but it's pretty deep, all the folks behind me. So if I can't answer the question, I've got the folks behind me to do that. Just a little bit of our strategic partners. We don't have to spend much time on that. That's just the lawyers. I do think it's important you understand a little bit about the person standing up here in front of you. I'm not going to spend much time here, but we're meeting each other for the first time. Actually, this is my first class in St. Louis Park through the community education program. So I've been working with Angie for several months, and so we're kicking things off with the family cabin. So all you are the guinea pigs. So it'll be good. But there you go. So I am a Minnesota native. I grew up in Delano, just out west a little bit. I live in Rockford now. Don't hold that against me. I'm a happy father and proud father of 3. This pretty lady here is my fiance. So I like others, life threw me a curveball about 10 years ago. I had a divorce that I was not expecting and did not want. And that changed my life then. It changed my estate. It changed how I had to move forward with things. And so whether it's divorce, whether it's a death, whether it's incapacitation, all these issues of life, sometimes we have to deal with these things. So anyways, after sitting And, you know, in my depressive state for years, kidding basically, my kids were telling me to get off my behind and go meet someone. So several years later I did. So this is Denise, my fiance. We got engaged last fall. So I'm looking forward to my second chance. But that'll change things again, won't it? Once I have a new wife in the mix. She's got children from her side. I've got children from my side. Now we've got a whole new Brady Bunch going on. How do we control assets? How do we pass things from one generation to the next while trying to control all of our interests? And it's okay to talk about that and do that, but you have to have a plan in place that will do that. So my kids are here. Yes, I ride a Harley. Yes, I play the accordion. That's my mom. She's in heaven now. But anyway, so I like to do a lot of activities, and professionally, I'm a graduate of North Central University here in the Twin Cities, certified estate planner, as I said. I've been in the business quite a while as a communications executive and trainer and teacher, and currently serve as the Director of Client Services right there in Osseo. And speaking of that, why don't I quickly go over the little handouts you have in front of you, just so we can get the housekeeping out of the way, and then we'll dive in. You've got several pages sitting in front of you. The first one simply has our name on it, Generations Legal Services. And if you hear anything tonight that you would like me to share with you later, give you a call, or send you something via email, I just need to know how to get it to you. That's the only reason I ask for this back. We don't put your name in a database. We don't do any marketing. We don't do any solicitation. So my commitment to the city of St. Louis Park, to the school district, and to you is that I'm here to educate tonight, not solicit. But if you want some information, or if you want to take advantage of the little follow-up meeting later, you can do that. You just need to let me know. So you could leave this on your table at the end of the night, and it's only so I can contact you and follow up as you have requested. So that one you'll leave behind. The other yellow card is just an example of one of the law firm partners that we work with. Morris Law Group, I just happened to pass theirs out. They're right here down the road in Edina. We have different firms all around the state of Minnesota, but all our law firm partners all do the exact same thing for us. They do all the drafting. It's all set pricing for people that want help, and it works pretty good. So they're the legal expert. You can learn a little bit about them. On the back of that card, there's a spot to take notes. So if you would like to jot some things down tonight that you hear, feel free. This one you can keep and take home with you, this yellow card. And the next piece of paper is just, it looks like a high school award certificate. And this is really just basically a little follow-up after tonight. This is an extension of our education tonight. Today is a public setting, right? We've got people here from the outside, and we've even got a TV camera. We've got other people all listening, and we can only get so deep on questions. We can only get so personal, right? We don't want to read anyone's mail in front of the group here. So if you ever wanted to take what we learned tonight over a cup of coffee in the privacy of your home or at a coffee shop or whatever, you can do that, and we provide that. And there's no charge for that. It's our extension of our educational commitment to St. Louis Park. So that's available to you anytime down the road, and we can look at our calendars and find a time if you'd like that. And the last piece of paper that has, again, our name on it, and my name's up the top right, basically just says what a great guy I am and how fun I am to work with. So you can learn a little more about our services on that sheet of paper, and you can take that with you as well. Okay, so tonight I want you to relax. This is education only, all right? I'm not here to give legal, financial, or tax advice per se, but it is going to be good information. Information you should know and consider when you're making your decisions. And at the end of the day, we have all these experts behind us, and if anyone needs help, we cross that bridge if or when we come to it. So tonight we're here to learn. As always, you want to do your own homework. Make sure you're vetting anyone who's standing up here and saying whatever. I hear about people going to workshops all the time, and magically, no matter who's given the workshop, all roads lead to an annuity, or all roads lead to something else that we didn't think we were coming for. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it does happen. Here, it's just education. That's the way we do it. I'm not here to point anyone anywhere. But if you ever do decide to work with someone, obviously you want to do your own vetting and make sure they're competent. Did you know that someone can be likable and trustworthy and still not be very good at their job? So likability and trustworthiness is important, right? But you shouldn't stop there. You have to make sure the team or the person you're working with knows their trade, has the experts, understands how to do this stuff because it's so important. So don't get too hung up on how long you've known them or how comfortable you see them every weekend at church. All these things are good, but we still have to make sure they're competent. And I wouldn't even be standing here in front of you if St. Louis Park didn't do a good job vetting our team and making sure that we honor our commitment to education over solicitation. So that's why I'm here tonight. So again, there's two parts to our approach. Kind of a public part one here tonight and a private part two, and that's available to any of you down the road. You just let me know. I'm not going to call you. You're going to have to call me. I'm too busy. But if you want that, I'll be there. And then we just take it as needed. So that's a little bit about that certificate. We already talked about that. All right, so here we go. I'm glad you're here. Cabins are quite an interesting topic when it comes to assets. It's one of probably several assets that you have as your family or as your collective relationship with your spouse, or if you're on your own, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you have children or not. I don't care how many zeros you have behind your name. We all have something. Everyone has an estate, right? Everyone in the room, whenever I ask the question, who has an estate? Every hand should go up, because we all own or have something. And I always hear from people, well, Jeff, I'm going to make my last check bounce. I'm spending it all. My kids, they're fine. They don't need anything. And we can have fun and joke about that, but the reality is most people are leaving something behind, right? We don't always spend it all. With good management and living within our means, and these principles, these incomes are growing, these investments, all that's good. When the day comes and now it's time to transfer these assets to our next generation, how smoothly is that going to go? Is it set up for success? And every asset is different. An annuity is different than a life insurance policy, which is different than a bank account, which is different than a cabin, which is different than a timeshare. These all have different ownership documents, right? And we have to just dive deep and make sure we're looking at all of them. So cabins are a different nut to crack. The less information we have up front, and the less of a plan in place for this thing is only going to breed confusion and chaos down the road. And we usually don't want that. So we have to get ahead of this stuff. And they are different. Cabins are a little different from other things, because if you think about it, money is money. We distribute it. We want to bless our children. I've heard from people, hey, I don't want to endow my kids. I want to bless them. I want to give them something, but I don't want to just turn them into a trust baby or get them, thinking they don't have to stand on their own 2 feet. So it depends on the amount of money, but eventually money is distributed. Vehicles are sold or transferred, furnishings are donated or given away, but cabins are usually passed down, right? We want the cabin to stay in the family for all of the right reasons, and we'll talk about those tonight. So we've got to have that plan in place, because otherwise this haven of happiness, this place where we would escape the stresses and get up north in the North Shore, could easily turn into a problem where there's confusion, infighting, family dynamics, relational turmoil, whatever. That's what we don't want. And the default, ladies and gentlemen, when this stuff's not done correctly, is that everyone wins except the family when things are not set up for success. So we just want to pause and make sure we're looking at this stuff and it's set up to avoid these things. So cabins are great. I mean, look what they represent. The memories of our families, from little tykes all the way to grandma and grandpa, over the years, over the decades, wonderful stories, shared experiences, happiness, peace of mind, getting away from the grind of the daily work. Look at all the stuff we do up there. We're swimming. My daughter learned how to ski for the first time on a boat at a friend's cabin. It wasn't my cabin, but it was his. But I've never forgotten that. I still have the picture when she got up along the boat for the very first time. So we develop these experiences. The whole family's we're just soaked into this family cabin. And that's all the reasons why we have them. They also represent some other realities, don't they? A lot of work to take care of the place. Who's been doing the work? Who's going to do the work in the future when grandma and grandpa are gone, or aunt and uncle, or mom and dad? Sometimes the original owners take care of all this stuff, and us as kids, we're just gliding along and we love it. It's easy, and it should be easy for a certain period of time. But when we get older and now the patriarchs or the monarchs are gone, and And now that is passing to the new owners, are we going to do as good a job? Many times there's more owners and more people involved than there was before. And now we're forming a committee. And if the best way to not get anything done, as they say, is to form a committee, right? They represent expense. Cabins aren't cheap. I'm dealing with, our team is dealing with a lady right now who's got a cabin up on Trout Lake. Beautiful cabin. It's worth 7 figures. And we're trying to figure out how to pass that. And she wants to sell it. She wants to donate some of the money. But the problem is we are so tied into this cabin, we're having a hard time working with the client to find a realistic sales point. And we even have a buyer that's offering what we feel is over market value. The seller's being a little reluctant. And it's because of all of this stuff. And we feel it's worth more. We want it to be worth more. But in reality, it might not be worth more. And so ongoing maintenance, ongoing payments, these things add up. Responsibilities for the cabin, either now or in the future. So cabins represent a lot of things, don't they? You probably could add your own stories to this. When we're talking about whether it's a cabin, whether it's a single family home, whether it's another asset over here, it's our stuff. And when we're gone, when we deal with all of these people throughout the states and over the years we've dealt with, we hear the same things over and over. So I don't think there'd be much disagreement in the room over this. Most people do not want to be a burden when that time comes. We want things to go smoothly. I don't want any fighting or conflict, okay? I don't want to pay lawyers anymore. I've been paying lawyers all my life. Do I have to pay them again when I'm gone? Well, hopefully not. But if things aren't in order, yes, you will. My father is gone, but he certainly didn't want any more money than needed to go to the government or taxes. He paid his taxes and did everything he should while he was alive. But he didn't want any more to get siphoned off or bitten off of the estate value in the future. We also want our kids to inherit more than just stuff, right? We want them to inherit our values. I want them to treat these assets and be responsible with this money and be charitably inclined, because that's what we were. Hopefully their marriages are solid, maybe, maybe not. What about their financial discipline? The younger generations, folks, usually are doing a little bit different here than the older. So we just want you to think about that. Is it a good thing or not a good thing to have all of this money or all this wealth or these assets transferred to these people that may or may not share or be on the same page as the original owner? We don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the next 20 or 30 years is going to be. I think I've done a really good job with my 3 kids. But who knows? And many times it's not our kids, it's spouses that they're married to. That's many times the reality. It's outside influence. You know, it's pillow talk at night. And these are the kind of things that sometimes come in and start to have a ripple effect when we thought we had our plan in place. Here's some other sad statistics, and these are reasons why people don't like talking about this. The average marriage in America now, according to the U.S. Bureau of Census, is only about 7 to 8 years. So I met with a lady earlier today, celebrating 56 years of marriage. Wonderful. I get to do that and meet people all the time like that. So it's just a wonderful testimony and testament for everyone else, and they stuck it out. You know, I know that not over 56 years was just, you know, a cakewalk, right? But they stuck it out. The lady told me, she said, Jeff, years ago I got a phone call from both my sons during the same week. She just told me this about 5 hours ago in my meeting with her. Both of my sons called me at different times, unbeknownst to the other, to tell me they're both getting a divorce.
Oh, crap.
So none of them was expecting it. Certainly affected mom. And so these are the realities we're having to deal with. Now, if her sons end up getting, I don't even know when that happened. I think it happened already in the past. I don't know if the sons have remarried, but you know, more divorces means more blended relationships, right? What if my child marries someone I really don't have a lot of confidence in? I don't know. That could happen. Special needs is a big deal. If you know someone, if there's someone in your family that's already getting medical assistance from the state due to a disability or something like that, we have to be very careful on how we transfer assets to that person. We can't just drop a bag of money on their head because we will affect their medical assistance, right? We can supplement their life in different ways, and there's solutions to all this, but we've got to make sure we're talking about them. You know, one thing about the younger generation nowadays is we just have more stuff than our parents did. We own a lot more. We have things like cabins, multiple properties, investment, apartment buildings, or whatever, business interests. You know, so a lot of times there's more assets and there's just more stuff to deal with. So people see these things, and these aren't very encouraging statistics, some of them, and so they don't want to do anything. But remember, even if you decide to kick the can down the road, you're still making a decision. And if we're going to make a decision, let's make a decision that's going to move things forward, right, for our family. And in other words, let's stop procrastinating. You know, I do a lot of work for North Central, my alma mater, and the president of North Central, Scott Hagan, he wrote a book some years back. It's just a combination of quotes that he has either heard or that he said himself. One of my favorite is right in the middle. It says, "Procrastination doubles the price of everything." And I like that because it's true, and it's not just true in the sense of monetary. You know, it can be twice as difficult. It can be twice as confusing down the road. It can be twice fill in the blank, right? And yeah, it can be twice as expensive, if not more. None of this stuff's getting cheaper. So what should families do when we see about all these, we start thinking about this stuff, it seems overwhelming. I just want it to go smoothly, but I don't know what to do. So we've got to just slow down and make a decision to fix it, all right? Understand what your options are, so that's one reason I'm glad you're here. We're going to learn a lot about your options tonight, and eventually we need a plan in place. And I always tell people this as well, you know, it's okay if you want to throw up your arms and just do nothing. Because if you don't have a plan, did you know the state of Minnesota has one for you, right? And that's not always the most efficient or probably the most elegant that we would like. So let's not rely on that if we can help it. All right, so as we move forward now and start talking about getting a plan in place, this plan is going to kind of include two different boxes, two different elements. One is kind of the gray matter, which I'll call the subjective side, and the other one's a little more of the nuts and bolts or the black and white. It's a little more straightforward over here. We'll call that the objective side. And our challenge is bridging these two differences, right, with our families and with the people that are involved. Over here on one side, it's kind of the gray matter. We've got people's feelings. We've got biases that are worked in, whether they're admitted or not, right? We've got emotions. We've got opinions, right? We've got communication challenges, influence from others, people interpreting things differently, or thinking this differently, or so-and-so doesn't like so-and-so from the last gathering, and now we've got more conflict. That's a subjective challenge. On the other side, this is kind of where a lot of the men like to camp, okay? We just like to go to our nothing box and just deal with the basics, just the facts. Just give me the facts, ma'am. It's supposed to be more unbiased. It's just more, hey, what's the issue? What are we dealing with? Is it a cabin? Is it a vacant piece of property? Is it a timeshare? Is it a bank account? Is there a legal agreement in place? Do we have a will or a trust? And if so, what does it say? So this is more of the basics, but boy, we can't ignore this one either, right? Because everyone's going to bring their own version of these, quote, facts to the table. So, and we're dealing with families, and we just have to find a way to bridge that gap and really not camp in either one. So, because it will include both. So just know that as we move forward, you and your family, every family has to deal with this stuff, right? So keep that in mind as we move forward. Let's talk a little bit about what I think is the subjective challenges first, because this one is challenging and we can't ignore it, even though we may not like it. But we're dealing with family, right? That can be a great thing, but sometimes it's not a good thing. I have had many people in our office over the years, for whatever reason, coming in to amend their trust or update their will or something to disinherit one of their own children out of the estate. And that's hard for people to do, but people do it for a number of reasons. And I'm not here to say they're good or bad. It's your money. It's your family. If you don't think things should flow this way, you have to change it. So that's what some people end up doing. But family dynamics are a big deal. And we want our families to get along. We want everyone to stay married happily ever after. And we don't want there to be any fighting or fussing when we're gone. But sometimes that happens, and we just have to make sure we're being aware of it. Relationships are a big deal within our family, right? Communication is always half the battle. If you're not communicating, you're not getting anything done. You're not going to advance the ball down the court at all. We have to find a way, find a means, find a location, maybe a neutral location, where everyone can come together and start talking. We conduct sometimes some family meetings for people, for this. So I can kind of be the referee or the bad guy in the middle, just trying to get some information across before everyone, loses their you-know-what. If we don't think money and greed and covetousness is involved in some of this stuff, we're lying to ourselves. Money makes people crazy. And not always, thankfully, but sometimes it does. And we just have to recognize that the more money or, the more assets that might be coming, now people are starting to jockey for their position and make sure I'm going to get my share, and so didn't contribute to the cabin nearly as much as you did, honey. So you better make sure you talk to your parents, and we get all of these things, and it boils down to some of these negative traits that are a fact of life. So, good kids trying to honor mom and dad, they'll probably get through this fine, but it doesn't always happen. And we have to have the conversation to make sure we're addressing it if it comes up. The better the plan, the more likely these things won't creep in. But if there's no plan in place, or if it's very vague, hard to interpret, you're just asking for, you're just probably asking for more trouble than you want. Sometimes even when we know there's something coming, like a cabin, it's hard, and these things catch us by surprise. There's a little article that I'm not going to read to you or really show you, but this was written by a family coach named Sarah Carlson right here in Minnesota. She's a good friend of one of our law firm partners. Carlson Coaching and Consulting is her name, but she talks about their own family cabin, and for 47 years how the family loved it and used it, and then all of a sudden in 2008 she says things started to fall apart. And it's because the original owners started to either pass away or step back from the responsibilities, and now everything's starting to fall down on all of us. Well, they weren't quite ready, and they didn't all quite get along as much as we thought. And she said we had no roadmap for handling the conflict that was in the extended family. It was scary and it was dangerous for all of us. And she's right. The divisions among us were exposed. The irritation and judgment were no longer covered up. Because why? Because of all these things. People have opinions. There's money involved. There's responsibility involved. There's ownership involved. And we're kind of jockeying for our position. So she just really has a wonderful article on how they worked through all of that. She said at the end of the day, the ownership of the cabin, and that's key. We're going to talk about ownership at the end here, our second half. The ownership needed to transfer to the next generation, my generation. And because of, 4 siblings had died, the previous owners, and the systems they put in place were no longer working as intended. So they had to work this out. She says they ended up getting there, but she says at the end of the day, and here's where I want to get to, they weren't able to do anything. They met, it took them 2 years, but until everyone faced the new reality that things have changed, it's not the same, it's new, and we're all involved, so let's figure it out. Until they all accepted that paradigm shift, they didn't go anywhere. It was just continued conflict and problems. So, this is a subjective part. People have to understand that, life is going to throw some curveballs, and we have to face this new reality before we're ever going to be able to move forward and have a conversation about putting a plan in place that can now fix things, and that's what they did. So, great article. If you ever needed any assistance on that, I would recommend her, but I'm not here to really promote anyone. I'm just sharing an article she gave me permission to share with you because it hits home about how cabins will transfer, and what do we do when it hits us, when that time comes. So these are some of those subjective things we need to deal with. Even on the objective side, we might think it might be a little easier, but there's still considerations to keep in mind. What are the objectives of the original owner? That's a good question. What did Grandma and Grandpa want to happen with the cabin? Did they write it down anywhere? Is there a will or a trust or some sort of agreement that's in place? And if so, what does it say? Good place to start, right there. Are we dealing with a death or are we dealing with incapacitation? Two different worlds, folks. Two different processes moving forward. They're still here. So if someone's incapacitated, they're still the owner, not the intended heirs that are written in a trust or a will. And until they pass away, that ownership won't pass, okay? What parties are involved? Are there financial or tax issues? Are we dealing with probate? I hope not, but you might. More people deal with probate than should. You know, I'm not here to throw probate under the bus. Those folks work hard. They're trying to do a good job because someone has to fix all this stuff if we don't, and update deeds and get things to transfer correctly. But it can all be avoided, and that's what we're really hoping to do if that's the goal of the family. So those are those two schisms we need to kind of bridge between the subjective and the objective as we move forward. Now, as we start to go to the second half here and wrap this up, there's really only so many ways you can pass a cabin or a piece of property to someone else. So let's talk about them at the end here, because one of these four is probably going to be what you and I do. You can get really creative, and there's other ways of doing certain things with other really extensive plans, but for most people, it's probably going to be one of these four options. One, you can just say, hey, forget it. I'm going to throw my hands up and die what's known as intestate. That means you died without a will or an estate plan of any kind. Or you thought you had a plan in place and it either wasn't valid or it was so outdated it's basically invalid and still will have to be worked out through a probate process. So when you die what's known as intestate, you are inviting the state of Minnesota to the table. All right, they like to come early and they like to go home late when they're involved with your estate. So keep that in mind. And it's not the end of the world, but now we have to have a judge down at the county that you lived in interpret the will and validate the will and figure out, or if there isn't a will, now we've got to notify creditors and bring everyone together and we got to start figuring it out. So very seldom do people take that route. There are times you might need a county judge to be the referee because no one can get along. And there's dynamics at play where it's better to just route the estate through probate and let the judge hammer things down, okay? But that's probably an exception, right? But there are times where probate does make sense. So I'm not here to say we should avoid it 100% of the time, but most people do not need to go through that detour, okay? But if you don't have a plan in place, that's your plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Number two, probably the most common and probably the most misunderstood estate planning document out there is a traditional will. Anyone in the room have a traditional will? They're usually the most common low-hanging fruit because what have we heard all our lives? Well, get a will done. Well, you need to get a will. Oh, I better get a will done. So people get a will done and they think they're done. And I will say you've got a good start. But at the end of the day, if this was your will, you've got a set of instructions of what you want to happen when you're gone, but that will can't transfer your cabin. The will doesn't own anything. It's a set of instructions that is given its legal legs in a probate procedure, because that's what probate does. It validates your will and it interprets your will. All right? So if we want to avoid all that, it's okay to have a will. I'm not here to say wills are bad, but wills don't really own or transfer property unless or until the will is probated. And if we want to avoid that, you can keep a will, but if you have a will as your estate planning document and you own property, you better know or understand what a TODD is, a transfer on death deed. Have any of you heard of that before? Good. Thank God one hand goes up. I don't like it when my industry doesn't do a better job explaining these things to people. And if you have a lawyer that sends you home from their office with a will, and if you are going home with the understanding that you're done and everything is fine and will go smoothly, I'm sorry, they have done you a disservice. People need to understand that transfer deeds are needed so the property can transfer outside of probate from mom and dad to the new owners. That's what a transfer on death deed does. Does that make sense? Yeah. And you have to have one so that piece of property is set up for success. Did you have a question or no? Okay, so that's the importance of a transfer on death deed, and it's what's needed if you usually have a will-based plan, because the will can't really do anything until it's probated. So to avoid that mess, we got to get the cabin set up with a transfer deed. We're going to come back and talk about transfer deeds because there's pros and cons to those. Okay, but think of it that way. It'll keep that cabin out of court. It allows it to go from mom and dad to the new owners. It's like putting a beneficiary form on a piece of real estate. That's what a transfer and death deed is. Okay, the third way is through a revocable living trust. Some might call it a cabin trust if we're dealing with just the cabin. Yes, you can have a specific trust for a specific asset. But most people create just a regular revocable living trust, and they put all their assets inside that protective legal fence. Putting all my animals inside this fence. But there's two parts to this that are very important, and we'll talk about that. You got to build the fence, so a lawyer has to draft your trust, and that's just your estate plan. It's your rule book. It says who gets what when you're gone and who's in charge. But unlike a will, a trust is different. It's an entity that can own assets. People don't understand what trusts are either. They think they need to be Rockefeller rich or have 20 different properties in order to even consider a trust. It's not about that. What we're talking about on all of this, folks, is how much control, protection, and efficiency you want with your estate. And wills and trusts work quite differently. But this, you can't just come home from the lawyer's office either and think you're done. Well, gee, honey, we got our beautiful trust. It cost a little bit more. It sure is impressive. I think we're done. I will say you've got your beautiful legal fence built, but where are all of your assets, all of your animals? They need to be inside the fence. Otherwise, what good is your fence doing? So a trust has to be funded. You heard that term before? Funding, F-U-N-D-I-N-G. Funding is simply retitling assets so they are owned by our trust and not owned by me as a person. But I own my trust. So anything my trust owns, it's still mine. Does that make sense? And it's a different way of kind of corralling up all the animals inside your trust. And then when I pass away, guess what? My trust doesn't. It's a legal entity that continues to live on, protecting my animals and then distributing them when I said and to whom, that type of thing. So that's an option. And then some people consider forming a business entity, an LLC, to handle something like a cabin. So we're going to talk about these a little more in detail. Number one, dying intestate. Try to avoid this one, okay? I'm not legal advice, but if I'm your son, please don't die without having done anything. And if you are going to do that, Dad, then don't name me as the executor, name my brother, okay? Because he's the one that caused you all the sleepless nights. I'll just sit over here with my sisters, collect my same share, and he can do all of this.
All the work.
So, because it is challenging on our executor, on our what they call personal representative nowadays.
You bet.
And again, if we don't want to leave a mess behind, we don't want to be a burden, we want it to go smoothly, well then, let's make sure it does. So anyways, but if there are people, some people just never get around to it. If you're in a car accident and now they're gone, well, here you go. That's why there's these laws of intestate succession and rules of descent and distribution that the state has in play. It's public distribution of your assets. you're paying court fees and settlement charges, you're paying a lawyer to navigate the probate process, and that's usually not very fun. Depending on the county you live in, it can take a few months or it could take a year and a half. Question?
What is public distribution of assets?
What is public distribution of assets?
Opposed to what?
As opposed to private distribution of assets, where your neighbors and your nosy friends don't know who's getting what, when, and how.
Okay.
Some people like it private. Anytime your estate gets routed through a probate process, now that's public record, because we're down at the county, and they have to record everything. That's by law. So everything is a matter of public record, including if you had a will or didn't have a will, or all the kids come in, and people can come in and challenge and contest and fight or fuss, and they handle all that down at the public probate process. So some people don't like that because I don't want others knowing what's going on with my stuff. Well, then we should have gotten ahead of that. Okay, so this is what's happening to fix things if we don't. So this is kind of the downfall if you throw up your hands, but just know there is a plan in place to address the estate. Okay? Let's keep going, because most people are going to not do number one, thankfully. Okay, but I see a lot of wills all the time. Most people, if they have an estate plan, of those that have something, I would say about 60 to 70% have a will. We only usually see about 10 to 12% of clients or people that have a trust. It might not even be that high. So wills are very common, and again, people think when they get their will done, they're done. But you're learning tonight, you're not quite done. There's a little bit more we need to do. And if you have a will, we probably need to have a transfer on death deed for any property that you own. So it can go from mom and dad or the original owners to the new owners. So that's the good news. We're setting up the asset for success. And as long as I got it from A to B, I don't need anyone down at the court to help me, right? So that's good. You took care of your own asset. It's private, it happened immediately, and it's wonderful. People on the backside of that own the property usually as tenants in common. They're independent owners of the asset. They're not joint owners like mom and dad were. They are tenants in common. So me and my 3 siblings, if we're your 4 kids, and you do a transfer deed, Dad, to us 4, yes, we get the property, but now we're 4 independent owners of the same asset, which means we need to get along. We need to at least get along enough to the closing table to get it sold. So all 4 signatures. And oh yeah, if any of us are married at the time, pull out some extra chairs for our spouses, because transfer deeds require signatures of everyone. So the more people you leave an asset to through a transfer deed, the more dicey it can become. Does that make sense? But we avoided probate. We got it from this owner to the new owners. If it's only going to one child, that'd be the best scenario. Even better if they're not married. That's just the way it goes, because then it would just be the signature of your child. If they're married, the spouse needs to sign off on that deed if or when it's sold. Does that make sense?
True in Minnesota and Wisconsin?
True in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Yep, most states are like this. Okay, now Wisconsin's a community property, and so that's having to do more with ownership of assets and when they're brought into the marriage, into the relationship. If anything, a community property state might be a little easier on transferring stuff to children, but it's my understanding that transfer deeds on the backside, tenants in common, it's usually like this in most states. Most spouses will also have to sign off. Well, what if the one spouse who is not a beneficiary, they're just married to your child who is the beneficiary? So they don't get any of the property, but they're married to one, and there's spousal rights. There's marital, protections built into some of these legal things. So that's why they have to sign off. And if they say, "Forget it, honey, I'm not going to sign off," is the cabin going to be able to be sold?
No.
No. So just keep that in mind.
Does a divorce cancel?
If there's a divorce, then they're not going to sign. If they're still married at the time of this transfer, that soon-to-be ex-spouse is still involved.
Oh, okay.
But if they're legally divorced, now he or she's on the outside looking in. So that's a good question. It depends on when the divorce actually took place.
Gotcha.
So just know, the more people you're trying to give a cabin to through a transfer deed, the messier it will probably become. But it will avoid probate, because we're transferring the ownership of the asset, and that's what we're talking about. We have to make sure the ownership transfers. Okay, so keep that in mind with the will, but it is possible. Now, I'm dealing with the will right now with a person with one child, and they're not married. I said, you are in the best scenario to get your home from, and there just was a home, it wasn't a cabin, but kind of the same difference, to get your home from you to the child. Do a transfer deed, no probate, your son won't have to do anything, he'll go down to the county courthouse, put it, just mom's in heaven, and they'll retitle the house in his name, and it's his. Now, if there's a loan on that home, they'll still have to deal with the bank and that kind of thing, but he owns the asset. We took care of the ownership. Okay, let's keep going so we can wrap up. Number 3, revocable trust. Now, here's where the cabin, the ownership of the cabin, would be conveyed into your revocable trust. So we would do something like a quitclaim deed and just change the ownership, put it in our family trust. And my wife and I own the trust, so the cabin is still ours, and the trust has very specific language on what happens to the cabin and how long we want to keep it in the family, or who's supposed to do what, or who's the new owners. So trusts work just fine for protecting the assets, and a properly funded trust, those assets will avoid the probate process because they're owned by this owner who never dies. And as long as there's an owner on record, we don't need to probate anything. Does that make sense? So, but you've got to get your animals inside that fence. Otherwise, it's not doing its job. So keep that in mind. Your successor trustee, if you name me as your executor, or they call it a successor trustee, I'm the one responsible to kind of manage the rules and get everyone to come, and this is what's going on with the trust, and I'm kind of the ringleader. Okay, I can't change your rules though, but someone has to be in charge of communicating and making things happen. That would be your successor trustee. If you want the home or the cabin to be sold, well, now if it's owned by the trust, and I'm in charge of the trust when you're gone, guess whose signature is only needed to sell the house? One. So can you see the efficiency, the ease of getting that property sold if that's what you wanted to do? I don't need 4 siblings' signatures, and I surely don't need any of their spouses in this scenario. That's your successor trustee.
Okay.
And they can't change the rules. All they can do is say, hey guys, Greg, Sandra, Teresa, come on in here. It says here on page 4, the distribution plan, which I can't change, that we're supposed to sell the house and we all split the equity in equal shares. Okay, I'm going to go sell the home and put it on the market. By the way, I'm the only one that needs to sign, but I'm just going to collect the check. Oh, by the way, the check will be made out to the trust, not to me. So we're all still protected. No one's gotten anything yet until I write the check out of the trust. So does that start to make sense on why people like these entities and how they protect things? They cost a little more to set up. That's why people don't like trusts, but they do so much more for your loved ones on the backside. Now, I will say this about trusts. The longer you expect to hold and protect and manage the animals inside your fence, the less effective probably a trust would be versus a business entity like an LLC, which we'll go to next. They're a little more flexible on changing the terms or managing the assets. This is pretty much cut and dry. It's going to protect the asset and eventually distribute it to your loved ones, which means that it'll have to be sold, and now I got the money and I'm distributing the money as you stated. Question. So the question is, if the trust owns the cabin and you stay in the trust, kids just sell the house and split the money when I'm gone. But if one of the kids wants to buy the family home and keep it in the family, he already owns a quarter of it, he or she, right? If there's 4 kids, and he or she can buy out the other 3, either with her own money or some other assets. So the point is, yeah, you could do that. Those kids could work that out because this is a private family plan that you don't file at the county and you don't record it anywhere. It's your estate plan and only you and your heirs know about it. And that's why people like trusts, because they're private and it's efficient. Only one person has to do the work instead of everyone coming forward with wills and beneficiary forms to fill out claim forms and that type of thing. Okay? Let's keep going though. I gotta keep moving here. So just know that the longer you want things to last in the trust, that may not be the best option. But we could do something different then just for that asset and then keep your main trust for everything else that typically is distributed within a year or two after you're gone. So there's ways of getting around that. Does that make sense? Okay, the last way is through a cabin or a business LLC, a limited liability company. So this is really nothing more than just a business entity that is established with the explicit intent of controlling the cabin, of owning and managing the cabin. With that business entity, we would have what's called an operating agreement that is drafted, and that's all the nuts and bolts of who's doing what. All the new owners are considered members of the corporation. They all have voting rights. They all have responsibilities on how to govern things, and they all got skin in the game. So some people like this type of approach for a cabin because it distributes the responsibilities, it holds everyone accountable, they can all come together and change or manage or massage the rules a little bit and maybe change this little element if it's to the betterment of the whole. They've got that option. You don't have that option with a revocable trust. These babies, your trust is revocable while you're alive, but when you pass away, now it's irrevocable. So that thing's locked in stone, and hopefully all the animals are inside there safe and sound, but now we got to follow the rules of the trust. You have a little more options here for flexibility to manage something like a family cabin. Does that make sense?
Wow.
Okay, so that's why some people like to do this. So the longer you want to manage that asset and keep it going, that's where this might be a better option if we're dealing with something like a cabin. Yes? The statutory limit on a trust is usually what they call 21 years, and there is a law called the rule of perpetuities in the world of estate planning. And it just means if you set up a revocable trust for your assets, we really don't want this thing to turn into a dynasty trust or 8 generations later. We want this to do its job and kind of be done, and we're going to give you 21 years on average. That's usually what we're going to see on this. So things beyond that, we might have to look at a different plan if you wanted to keep that asset in the generational downward stream for longer than that.
You mean 21 years from expiration?
21 years from the date of death of the owner grantor of the trust. That's right, because this thing really doesn't become its own entity until you're gone, until the owner is gone. Okay? So good question. Anyway, so that's how the cabin goes through. So a couple final thoughts as for each of these. Make sure you have a plan on this. Don't die intestate if you can help it. I don't think your loved ones or anyone's going to want you to do that. Okay, it's all of our responsibility to get a plan in place. All right, unless you really want a county judge and a lawyer to come in and take over and pay them to do it all. Most families would rather avoid that. Okay. The second thing with wills are fine. I'm not here to say wills are bad or that you shouldn't have one. But wills, ladies and gentlemen, according to state law, must be probated. Did you know that? Did the attorney tell you that? If you're going and drafting your own will somewhere over here, that's fine. I'm not going to talk you out of that, but you have to know what you have, and you have to know what you don't have. And I have found over the years that the legal industry, my industry, does not do a very good job explaining the pros and cons of wills. And this is my personal thought, and it's because they don't mind when your estate ends up in a probate process. Because where do you think they make most of their money? It's in a probate process. It's not drafting a will or even a trust. But I think that's short-sighted thinking, good service for families and keeping people out of court. That family is going to sing your praises. You're going to be busier than ever. So it's not like you're going to lose any money if you try to do things the right way. But most families would rather avoid probate. Probate is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. All that money is being paid to lawyers and courts out of your valuation of your estate, which, call me crazy, I think should be going to your family and your loved ones. So that's my soapbox opera on that. So wills are fine, but you have to have a TODD if you want to transfer property. It's just a matter of how many people are we trying to send it to. All right, with the revocable trust, remember any asset that's funded into the trust will avoid probate, okay? And but this option may not be best to address cabins or really hard family dynamics or things that you just want to have all kinds of unique control or a legacy asset in the family for the next 3 generations, or basic revocable trust may not be the best option. That's where your lawyer or the attorney, the experts, can help talk through the options there. But for most basic assets that people have, a home, maybe a timeshare, a couple cars, bank accounts, IRAs, annuities, life insurance, and IRA, or qualified brokerage accounts, most people nowadays are leaning into a trust because they like the way it works. There's more control, protection, and efficiency, but they do cost a little more up front. But then you're done. Then you don't pay anything on the back end. And finally, LLCs provide privacy and control for all the members, your new owner members, okay, and they tend to work best for long-term succession planning for cabins, and they encourage accountability among all the people. They're a different little entity to set up. Attorneys draft these all the time. They're not really that hard. It's really more of a matter of what kind of rules and stipulations do you want to bake in to your plan. Okay, so those are a few final thoughts with that. Remember, we can talk about cabins until the cows come home, no pun intended, but all of this discussion about how to protect or pass a family cabin means nothing if we don't have our foundational estate plan in place. So make sure you've got that. And folks, most people don't have their plan in place. They just don't. I see it every day. And we want to avoid that because everyone wins here except the family. All right, so we got to get ahead of that. The 4 cornerstones of any basic estate plan are right here. This isn't rocket science. You've heard this before, but have you gotten these things? Are they current? Do they need to be updated? Some of these don't expire, but sometimes the older they get, the less likely they would be accepted. So we got the living documents, which is a power of attorney and a healthcare directive. And then we have what we call our death or incapacitation documents, a traditional will or a revocable trust. All right, those are very important. Everyone over the age of 18 should have these cornerstones in place. All right, how to move forward? Take some time. I'm glad you're here tonight. It was a good first step for all of you. So take some time, get your own affairs in order. Don't leave a mess behind for the sake of your loved ones, okay? And if you're going to, name my brother Greg, not me, as your executor. Utilize the complimentary session if you'd like. We need to get our plan done, or we might need to have it updated if it's been really old and we need to dust it off. So there you go. That's the importance of that review. You can call me anytime or leave the yellow page on the table. I'd be happy to contact you, but it's really for whatever you want. And there's no obligation or cost to this. It's just a matter of now taking what we learned tonight on more of a personal level. Obviously, I'd love to work with you, but you have to ask me. I'm not going to solicit. But it starts here. We have to know what we're dealing with. Now, for those who are in the TV audience, you're looking at a screen right now that shows how our team does some of our services. And if you have any questions on this or the costs associated with that, you'll see my contact information right there on the screen. Feel free to reach out or email me or call or text. I'd be happy to answer any questions for you on that. All right, that's it. I want to thank you. I'll be able to stay here as long as you would like. We'll officially, just for the sake of time and recording, kind of wrap this up. But thank you for being here. John, I appreciate your help. But I'll stay here for as long as you have questions. And thank you so much, folks.